This is unique footage of the famous Chernobyl robots, from what we know, never published before. It was recorded in 1998 by Andrew Kharitonenko, who kindly shared this document with us. And we found it exceptionally valuable. These are hangars of the Jupiter factory in Pripyat, the facilities of the SpetsAtom enterprise. In the beginning of the 90s, SpetsAtom became the state emergency center of Ukraine, which operated a large fleet of unique machines. 12 years after the Chernobyl disaster, these facilities became one of the last outposts of human activity in the long-abandoned city. Andrew Kharitonenko also worked in Pripyat, at radiation monitoring department of RADEC. You may remember its story from our previous videos. One day, he and his colleagues were invited to Jupiter by Mikhail Bukov, a robotics engineer, our good friend and longtime consultant, who also appears later in this video. And so Andrei recorded on VHS camera everything he saw. This orange machine is MF3, a West German manipulator robot designed for the nuclear industry. At the time, robots of this type were widely used by German nuclear power plants. But in 1986, this one was purchased by the Soviets along with another robot, the infamous MF2, nicknamed Joker. Here they got much more extreme purpose, cleaning radioactive debris from the roofs of the reactor Unit 3. The manipulator had multiple axes of movement and could lift around 50 kilograms. And yet MF3's performance on the roofs was quite limited, and it's mostly served as a reconnaissance machine. Its manipulator was too small, while the tether cable was far too short to keep the operator far enough away from the intense radiation sources. And in general, those cables actually were always a problem. This is because after repeated decontamination with aggressive chemicals, their insulation often deteriorated. And don't forget, these were custom-made cables, so replacements were not exactly something you could simply order. The cameras caused similar problems. Here you can see that MF3 was later fitted with mounts for Soviet KTP-63 pan-tilt-zoom video cameras. That's because under extreme radiation, the lenses of its original cameras gradually darkened to a dirty violet color until they simply became unusable. So the original cameras had to be replaced with whatever suitable equipment was available. And what was available you can see right here. This control station was built around one of the very few Soviet mass-produced CCTV systems. Different versions could connect up to 8 cameras to one control station, allowing the operator to select a camera and remotely control its pan, tilt and focus. Mid-1990s already was not a Soviet time, and yet purchasing large quantities of foreign equipment was still difficult because of chronic underfunding. So many locally built machines continued to use the good old analog Vidicon-based KTP-63 cameras. And here is one of them. So this robot was nicknamed Scout. It was designed around 1987 for reconnaissance in dangerous areas, and it was very much built from whatever components the engineers could obtain. The wheels appear to come from a power tiller. They are connected by chains, while the gears are from the Soviet IJ-56 motorcycle. It has 2 independent electric motors, one for each side, so it means it can turn in place much like a tracked vehicle. There are some inscriptions visible, and they tell us that it is powered by 220 volts and it weighs around 100 kilograms, or roughly 220 pounds. Well, that considerable weight suggests additional shielding, which would make sense because of the following. On the back there is a radiation detector connected to a EMD-21 dosimeter. That is equipment intended for measuring extraordinarily high radiation levels, up to 10,000 of roentgens. Then the camera moves on to example of the next generation of Chernobyl robots. This system was designed specifically for works inside the sarcophagus. The idea was to create a unified modular chassis capable of carrying many different tools depending on the task. And from what is known, almost 20 configurations were proposed. It was a really ambitious concept. Unfortunately, this project also had some fundamental problems, and one of them is demonstrated rather wonderfully in this footage. From what we can make in the original sound, Mikhail Bukov essentially says, It has just too many controls. This computer, this displays, here is one box, there is another box, and over there is one more. So eventually this project never progressed beyond a couple of prototypes. A few meters away stand several much more famous machines, and among them is Modular CCTV, which we'll return to a little later. But first, the camera stops on a couple of earlier creations from the SpetsAtom era of the late 1980s. This robot was nicknamed the dump truck. The cylinder on its back is a container for the rolled cable, which was gradually released as the machine moved. It also carried cameras and lights. One of its tasks was assisting the enormous forestry manipulators during work inside the turbine hall of Unit 4. The forestry machines collected debris into containers, and this little dump truck carried them away. Next, right beside it, we get a look at several examples of the robot's control panels. These were produced right here by the same people who built the machines. Each system was essentially its own unique engineering project. Then, for only a couple of seconds, the footage also catches these machines. They are loaders based on ordinary tractors, but very heavily rebuilt. 2 hydraulic supports were added, together with an articulated arm and grapple. And although the driver's cab was removed, the original controls were still present, so the machines could be operated either manually or remotely. And then the camera catches something that was actually a discovery even for us. These are custom-made tracks for the STR-1 robot. From our previous episodes, you may remember that STR-1 was created by the same team that had designed the Soviet Lunokhod lunar rover. And here they point out an especially interesting feature. That is a charging contact. Most STR-1 were radio-controlled, and to make them more autonomous, charging stations were installed directly on the roofs. This connector pressed against a special contact pad, and it allowed to recharge its silver zinc batteries without being brought back to the operators. Much of the machine was made from titanium, something especially visible on these close-ups of its wheels. In total, 4 STR-1 robots were built, and this particular machine is the one now on permanent exhibition in the city of Chernobyl. And now we return to Modular CCTV. In 1986, 2 of them operated in some of the most dangerous parts on the roofs of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. But there is an interesting detail about the particular robot you see here. In 1987, after extensive decontamination, both machines were transferred to SpetsAtom. After inspection, the engineers decided to assemble one modernized robot using parts from the 2 original machines, and this is the result. And it continued to be used for many different tasks. For example, it performed a dosimetric survey inside the turbine hall of Unit 4 in the summer of 1997. That was just 1 year before this footage was recorded. The camera now moves to one of the most interesting systems operated by SpetsAtom and later by the Emergency Center, the remotely controlled Liebherr crane complex. And these strange-looking machines were part of it. They are rigging robots. Their arms were controlled from the operator's vehicle using master controllers that replicated the movements of the operator's own hands. The cameras here were German, manufactured by Grundig, and fitted with radiation-resistant lenses. And nearby stands the operator's truck. Its interior is isolated from the outside through an airlock, and inside there are 4 workplaces. For the chief supervisor, crane operator, engineer, and robot operator. The entire system could be controlled either through cables or by radio. So, during early tests, the SpetsAtom team managed to maintain stable remote control of the crane from an impressive distance of around 3 kilometers. That's almost 2 miles. And there is a reason I'm talking about this Liebherr complex in the present tense, because it still exists and it's still operated by the Emergency Center. For just a few seconds, another strange machine appears in the footage, but this one is actually not a robot. It is a semi-automatic mining cart. I cannot really tell you much about the history of this particular example, but we do know that almost identical machine still stands abandoned inside one of the halls of the Chernobyl sarcophagus. This one, however, now stands at the permanent exhibition in the city of Chernobyl. The State Emergency Center also had some more modern equipment, such as this American mini loader. Here Mikhail Bukov explains how it is controlled and points out that its drive system is fully hydraulic. Of course, nowadays we have this kind of machines almost everywhere, but at the time this was still pretty new and somewhat exotic. So, needless to say, the visitors immediately had to climb inside and try the seat and controls for themselves. Also, for a few seconds we have the glimpse of this Komatsu bulldozer, while it was still relatively intact. You may remember this machine had originally been built for underwater work, but in Chernobyl, however, it was used extensively for moving contaminated soil around the power plant. Today it still stands there, but already in a derelict condition. Unfortunately, by the time this footage was recorded, operations of the emergency center in Pripyat were already gradually coming to an end. Most of the robotic equipment seen here was eventually relocated to the decontamination workshop near the nuclear power plant. Some machines still remained there, and others had their most contaminated components removed, and they were later placed on permanent exhibition in Chernobyl. If you want to learn more about these machines, check out the previous episodes of our series Chernobyl Uncharted. You can also find bonus materials on our Patreon page, the link is in the description below. And once again, our special thanks to Andrew Kharitonenko for preserving this unique document of that era and allowing us to share it with you. Stay tuned, don't forget to subscribe, and thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.